Welcome back to Legacy Ignited, the place where forgotten stories come alive and touch the deepest corners of your heart. Today's story is one you will never forget, because when a Comanche warrior came to a widow's door, his demand shocked everyone. A lonely widow stood at her cabin door, clinging to the last piece of family she had left, her young son. But that night, the silence of the prairie shattered. A Comanche warrior rode up, his face carved with desperation, his eyes burning with need. And then, he spoke words no one could have imagined. He said her son must learn to hunt, and his motherless daughter must be fed by the widow's own breast. It was a demand that shook her to the core, a choice between fear, survival, and a bond that would change their lives forever. What happened next would leave the entire frontier whispering in disbelief. Before we begin, if stories like this touch your heart, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs it. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. The prairie was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that stretched deep into the bones of anyone left standing in the ruins of war. Sarah, a widow barely past 30, leaned against the wooden frame of her cabin door. Her eyes swept across the fading horizon, where the sun bled into streaks of crimson, turning the sky into a canvas of sorrow. She had buried her husband less than a year ago, taken by a fever that swept through the frontier like a silent thief. Since then, every breath, every night of waiting for dawn, felt like a battle she had to fight alone. With no kin to help her, no neighbors for miles, she clung to survival through sheer willpower for herself and for her young son, Daniel, who was barely 10. Daniel was growing fast, too fast for Sarah's comfort. His small hands were already roughened by chores, but his eyes still carried the innocence of a child. He knew little of the world's cruelties, though Sarah feared it was only a matter of time before hardship forced him into manhood. She tried to protect him, but deep down, she knew she couldn't shield him forever. The frontier demanded strength, and strength was often earned in blood. That evening, as shadows stretched long across the earth, Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats. She froze. Out here, visitors were rare, and those who came seldom brought peace. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she pulled Daniel close, whispering for him to stay behind her. The horse drew nearer until she could see him, the rider, tall, broad-shouldered, painted in the fading glow of sunset. A Comanche warrior. Her breath caught. She had heard stories of Comanche riders, fierce men whose skills in battle were unmatched, whose presence often struck terror into settlers' hearts. Now, I sat astride a dark horse at her very doorstep, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on her. The warrior dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate. His eyes were dark, sharp, unreadable, and yet not cruel. He walked forward until he stood just a few steps from her porch, his presence commanding without a word spoken. Sarah's pulse raced. She had no weapon within reach, no neighbor to call for help. All she had was the fragile strength of a woman who had already lost too much. Widow. His voice came deep and firm with the weight of command. His English was rough, accented, but clear enough to chill the night air. I come with need. Sarah swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as she held Daniel closer. What do you want? She asked, her voice a whisper carried by fear. The warrior's gaze shifted briefly to the boy, peeking from behind her skirt. His eyes softened for a fleeting second, then hardened again. Your son, he said. He must learn to hunt. He must become man. The plains do not forgive boys. Sarah stiffened, her breath shallow. Before she could speak, the warrior continued, his jaw set, his voice steady as stone. My daughter, he said, pausing as if each word carried a burden heavier than steel. She is motherless. She requires milk. She requires life. You will give it. The words struck Sarah like a blow to the chest. Her knees weakened, and for a moment, she thought the earth itself had shifted beneath her. His demand was unthinkable. He was asking her to give of herself, to nurture a child that was not her own, while offering her son to be shaped under his hand. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came. Her heart screamed, but her tongue felt trapped. What kind of bargain was this? What kind of man walked to a widow's door and asked for such things? Daniel's small hand clutched her dress, his eyes wide, confused. He didn't understand the weight of the words, but he could feel his mother's fear. The warrior did not flinch. His eyes bore into hers with a fire that demanded to be answered. He stood, not as a beggar, not as a tyrant, but as a man bound, by duty to his daughter, to survival, to the harsh truth of the land. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to take his impossible demands elsewhere. Yet something in his eyes held her back. They were not the eyes of a man seeking to dominate, but of one carrying unbearable necessity. She could see it, the desperation. He tried to mask the silent plea buried beneath the firmness of his tone. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The warrior's gaze lowered briefly, then rose again with unyielding resolve. "Because you know loss," he said. "Because you understand hunger, and because only you can give what is needed." The words sank into her soul like arrows. She wanted to hate him for daring to step into her grief with such a demand. Yet she could not deny the truth he carried. She had felt hunger's cruel hand. She had wept through nights of emptiness. And she, above all, knew the agony of watching someone you love fade because you could not give them what they needed. Her heart wavered, caught between fear and compassion, between protecting her son and recognizing the desperation of another child. Daniel looked up at her with trusting eyes, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, what does he mean?" Sarah's throat tightened. She had no answer, no words that could shield her child from the truth clawing at their door. The warrior stepped closer, his presence towering yet steady. He placed a hand over his chest, his voice softer now, almost breaking. "I ask not as warrior," he said. "I ask as father." Sarah's breath trembled. In that moment, she no longer saw just a Comanche warrior. She saw a man who had walked through his own grief, carrying a daughter too young to survive without help. A man willing to cross boundaries, to lower pride, to stand before a widow and ask for something he could never demand. The prairie wind whispered through the tall grass as silence hung between them. The sun dipped lower, bleeding into night. Sarah's heart pounded with a storm of emotions: fear, anger, compassion, confusion. She had thought she knew loneliness, but now she realized loneliness had only been the beginning, because tonight a Comanche warrior had come to her door, and his demand would shatter everything she thought she knew about survival, about motherhood, about sacrifice. And as the darkness settled, Sarah knew this was not a choice she could escape. The air between them felt heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah's hand lingered on the wooden doorframe as if it were the last shield between her world and his. The Comanche warrior stood silent now, his broad shoulders lit by the dim fire of dusk, his horse stamping restlessly in the dirt behind him. His words echoed in her head. "I ask not as warrior, I ask as father." Sarah's heart quaked. Every instinct told her to shut the door, to lock away her son and bar this stranger from stepping deeper into her life. Yet there was no mistaking the desperation in his tone, the naked truth in his eyes. He wasn't here to conquer. He was here because need had stripped him of pride. Daniel tugged at her dress again. "Mama, please don't let him take me." His small voice cracked, carrying fear that twisted Sarah's soul. She knelt and pulled him close, brushing his hair back, whispering words she barely believed herself. "I won't let anyone harm you, Daniel." But even as she spoke, she knew harm came in many forms, and not all of them wielded a weapon. The warrior finally broke the silence. "You think I take your son away?" "No." His head shook once, firm, deliberate. "He stays with you, but he must learn, hunt, track, live. Without it, he will die young, weak. The land kills boys who do not know how to fight for food." Sarah's lips trembled. His words stabbed at her deepest fear that Daniel, sheltered too long, might grow without the skills a frontier life demanded. She wanted him safe, but safety was fleeting. A single winter could take him, a single failed crop, and she had no man to guide him now. The warrior's eyes softened again, his voice quieter. "I will teach, I will make him strong, but I ask you for life, too, my daughter." He stopped, inhaled sharply, as if speaking her name alone carried pain. "She is called Ioka. Her mother died with blood still fresh from birth. My daughter cries for food I cannot give. You can." Sarah's heart clenched. She imagined a baby frail, helpless, lips searching for nourishment that wasn't there. The thought made her chest ache. She had once cradled Daniel that way, his cries piercing her nights, her body the only thing standing between him and death. But could she do this again for another's child? For a Comanche's blood? Daniel's grip tightened around her arm. His innocence saw the warrior only as a threat, but Sarashi saw a father's plea, and that, more than anything, shook her. "Why should I trust you?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "How do I know you won't take him away? How do I know you won't come back with more of your people?" The warrior's jaw clenched. He lowered his head slightly, a gesture of humility, rare for a man bred in power. "You do not know," he admitted, "but I give you my word. And Comanche word is stronger than iron. My blood for your blood. My teaching for your mercy." Sarah stared at him, torn between the memory of story settlers slaughtered, wagons burned on, the living man before her, offering a bond of survival. Night was falling. The prairie stretched out in shadows, and the chill of evening crept into her bones. She knew she could not decide in haste, yet the urgency in his eyes told her he had no time to spare. "A child's hunger waits for no one. Bring her," Sarah whispered at last, her voice barely audible. "Bring your daughter." The warrior's chest rose with a breath that seemed to carry both relief and sorrow. He bowed his head slightly, then turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the fading light. Sarah collapsed against the doorframe, her body trembling as if she had just fought a battle. Daniel clung to her, his face buried in her dress. She stroked his hair, but her mind was far away. What had she done? What promise had she just made? Hours later, when the moon climbed high and the prairie glowed silver, Sarah heard the hoofbeat return. She stepped outside, lantern in hand, her heart pounding in her throat. The warrior approached slowly, cradling something wrapped in deer hide against his chest. When he dismounted, he revealed her a tiny infant, no more than a few months old, her cries sharp, desperate, piercing the night. Sarah's breath caught. The baby's face was thin, her lips trembling with hunger. Instinct overpowered hesitation. Sarah reached out, her arms moving before her mind could stop them. She gathered the infant against her, feeling the fragile heartbeat against her own chest. Daniel stepped back, confusion etched across his young face. "Mama, whose baby is that?" Sarah swallowed hard, rocking the child gently. "She's his daughter," she whispered, "and tonight, she is ours." The warrior's voice broke the moment. "Her name is Ayoka," he said softly, his tone no longer commanding but pleading. "She will live, if you allow it." Sarah glanced at him, then back at the baby whose cries echoed through the night. She felt the weight of a decision far greater than her own comfort. This wasn't just about survival. This was about humanity, about whether pain could bind strangers together instead of tearing them apart. "Daniel," Sarah said gently, kneeling so he could see the child's tiny face. "She has no mother. She has no one else. If we don't help her, she will die." Daniel's eyes shimmered with conflict. He was still a child, unprepared to understand the depth of sacrifice, but he nodded slowly, clinging to his mother's arm. "If you say so, Mama." The warrior's eyes glistened with something unspoken, something Sarah hadn't expected to see: gratitude. He bowed his head once, placing a hand over his chest in silent respect. That night, Sarah held Ayoka close, her body torn between fear and duty. The infant's cries softened as warmth and nourishment finally reached her. In that quiet, as Daniel drifted to sleep, Sarah sat awake by the lantern, her mind racing. What had begun as a demand now felt like a bond. But she knew bonds could be fragile, and tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't ready to face. Could she trust the warrior to teach Daniel without leading him astray? Could she open her heart to a child not of her blood without reopening the wounds of her own grief? And yet, as she looked down at Ayoka's tiny face, Sarah felt a stirring deep within her, a whisper she hadn't heard since her husband's death. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Still, shadows loomed. The Comanche warrior had stepped into her life, not with violence, but with a plea that tied their fates together. And Sarah sensed this was only the beginning. For the prairie was merciless, and choices always carried a price. Morning light spilled across the prairie, chasing away the shadows of the night before. Sarah woke with Ayoka still nestled against her chest, her tiny breaths steady now, her hunger eased. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah felt the warmth of another heartbeat against her own, fragile yet insistent, reminding her she was not as alone as she thought. Outside, the sound of movement stirred. She rose carefully, laying the baby in a cradle she had once used for Daniel. When she stepped onto the porch, she found the Comanche warrior waiting, his horse tied to the post, his presence calm yet heavy with expectation. Daniel stood nearby, a small bow in his hands, confusion and curiosity mixing in his young eyes. The warrior met Sarah's gaze. "Today," he said, "the boy learns." Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to shield Daniel, to keep him safe inside the fragile walls of her cabin. But she also knew the warrior was right. A boy who did not learn the ways of the land would be swallowed by it. She knelt before her son, cupping his face in her hands. "Stay close to him. Listen. Be brave." Daniel nodded, his small jaw tightening with determination far beyond his years. The warrior led Daniel into the tall grass, teaching him how to move without sound, how to watch the earth for signs of life. Hours passed as Sarah rocked in the doorway, her heart divided between fear for her son and awe at the bond forming before her eyes. When they returned, Daniel's cheeks were flushed with pride. In his hands, he carried a rabbit, his first kill. His eyes shone as he looked at his mother. "Mama, I did it. He showed me how." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She looked from her son to the warrior, realizing the truth. In teaching Daniel, the man had given him more than survival. He had given him manhood. That evening, as the prairie turned gold with sunset, the warrior stood before her once more. His voice was softer now, heavy with gratitude. "Your gift saved my daughter. My teaching saved your son. Our lives bound." Sarah's throat tightened. She thought of the baby sleeping inside, of Daniel's proud smile, of the weight she had carried alone for so long. Now, for the first time, she felt it shared. The warrior placed his hand over his chest, bowing his head. "You are mother to my child. I am father to your son." The plains made this so. Sarah's tears fell freely. She did not know what tomorrow would bring: more loss, more hardship, or perhaps something she had thought forever gone: hope. But she knew this moment would stay with her forever, because on a lonely evening, when she had nothing left to give, a Comanche warrior had come to her door, and his demand, shocking, impossible, unthinkable, had become the thread that wove two broken families into one. And in the silence of the prairie, where sorrow and survival often walked hand in hand, Sarah felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt alive.